The afternoon sun beat down on the cracked asphalt parking lot of Betty's Diner, a small roadside restaurant that had been serving travelers and locals for nearly 40 years. The faded red paint on the building's exterior told stories of countless seasons, and the neon sign that once glowed bright pink now flickered weakly even in broad daylight. This was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where coffee was always fresh, and where judgment was supposed to be left at the door. Walter Chen pushed through the glass door, hearing the familiar jingle of the bell above. His boots left small traces of dried mud on the checkered floor, something he always felt apologetic about, even though Betty herself had told him 100 times that a little dirt never hurt anybody. At 72 years old, Walter moved with the careful deliberation of a man whose body had given him decades of hard work and now demanded respect in return. His shirt, once blue, had faded to a soft gray from years of washing and sun exposure. His hands, rough and darkened from soil and sun, told the story of a life spent coaxing food from the earth. He nodded to Linda, the waitress who had worked the afternoon shift for as long as he could remember. She smiled back, already knowing he would order the same thing he always did: coffee black and a turkey sandwich with no mayo. Walter didn't believe in being difficult or drawing attention to himself. He believed in simple things, honest work, and treating people with respect, but today was going to be different. At a corner booth near the window, 3 young men sat with their laptops open and their phones face up on the table. They wore suits that probably cost more than Walter spent on clothes in a year. Their hair was styled with product that made it look artfully messy, and their watches caught the light every time they moved their wrists. They had been talking loudly since they arrived, their conversation full of numbers, deals, and complaints about people who just don't understand progress. As Walter made his way to the counter, one of them noticed him. The young man, who couldn't have been more than 30, nudged his companion and said something under his breath. They both looked at Walter and smirked. The third man glanced up from his phone and joined in their quiet laughter. Walter heard them but pretended he didn't. He had learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting. He approached the counter where Linda was already pouring his coffee. "Hey there, Walter," she said warmly. "The usual?" "Yes, please," he replied, his voice soft and slightly hoarse. "Thank you, Linda." That's when the comments started getting louder. "Man, I can smell him from here," one of the young men said, not bothering to lower his voice anymore. "Smells like he rolled around in a barn." "Probably did," another one responded. "Look at those clothes. Does this place even have a dress code?" The third one laughed. "Dress code? Dude, this whole town is stuck in 1975. These people don't know what century they're living in." Linda's face tightened with anger, but Walter gently shook his head at her. He didn't want trouble. He just wanted his sandwich and to get back to the farm. There was still work to be done before sunset, and the irrigation system in the east field had been acting up all week. He took his coffee and moved to find a seat. The diner wasn't crowded, just a couple of truck drivers at the far end, and an elderly woman reading a newspaper by the door. Walter chose a small table near the kitchen, away from everyone, but distance didn't stop the harassment. One of the young men pulled out his phone and started recording. "Hey, check this out," he said to his friends, making sure his voice carried across the diner. "This is what happens when you refuse to sell your land and join the modern world. You end up eating alone in a dump, wearing clothes that should have been thrown out a decade ago." His friends laughed on cue. Walter kept his eyes on his coffee cup, watching the steam rise in delicate spirals. His hands trembled slightly, but not from weakness. It was something else. Something that felt like a mixture of shame, anger, and profound tiredness. "I bet he's never even used a smartphone," one of them continued. "Probably still thinks the internet is some kind of fishing net." More laughter. A few other customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one said anything. That was the thing about cruelty, Walter thought. It didn't just hurt the person it was aimed at. It made everyone else feel helpless too. Linda brought his sandwich over, her jaw clenched tight. "Walter, I can ask them to leave," she whispered. "It's okay," he said quietly. "They're just young. They don't know any better." But they weren't finished. As Walter reached for his wallet to pay, one of the young men stood up and walked past his table. It happened so quickly that Walter didn't see it coming. The man's foot shot out, connecting with Walter's chair leg. The sudden movement caused Walter to lurch forward, and his wallet flew from his hands, hitting the floor with a smack. Coins scattered everywhere, rolling across the floor in different directions. Quarters, dimes, and nickels spread out like silver raindrops. A few dollar bills fluttered under nearby tables. The three young men erupted in laughter. The one with his phone out made sure to capture everything, zooming in on Walter's face, on his weathered hands reaching for the scattered money, on his bent back as he slowly lowered himself to the floor. "Oh man, this is gold," one of them said. "Pure gold. This is definitely going online." Walter got down on his hands and knees, his joints protesting with every movement. He could feel every eye in the diner on him. The shame burned hot in his chest, but he kept his face neutral. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing him cry. Not yet. He crawled across the floor, picking up coins one by one. A quarter here, 2 dimes there, a nickel that had rolled under someone's table. Each coin felt heavier than it should, weighted down by humiliation. "You need help down there, old man?" one of them called out mockingly. "Or are you going to be down there all day?" Walter's vision blurred. He blinked rapidly, trying to clear his eyes. "Just get the money and leave," he told himself. Just get through this and go home. His wife Mary's picture was waiting for him on the mantel. He could sit in his chair tonight and talk to her like he did every evening, telling her about his day. Though tonight maybe he would skip some parts. As he reached for a quarter near the leg of a booth, he noticed something. A pair of boots. Not work boots like his, but nice leather ones. Expensive but worn in, comfortable looking. Walter's eyes traveled up slowly. Jeans, a dark jacket. A baseball cap pulled low. The person sitting there was very still, watching everything. Walter grabbed the last of his coins and slowly, painfully got back to his feet. His knees ached. His pride ached more. He clutched the money in his fist and made his way back to his table, where his sandwich waited. Though his appetite had completely disappeared, the three young men were still laughing, still recording, still making comments. But Walter wasn't listening anymore. He sat down, put his money on the table, and stared at his sandwich. A single tear rolled down his weathered cheek, dropping onto the plate. He didn't notice that the man in the corner booth hadn't looked away. Not once. And he didn't notice the expression on that man's face, an expression of quiet rage mixed with something else. Determination, maybe. Or purpose. In the corner of Betty's diner, Keanu Reeves sat perfectly still, watching everything, missing nothing, and making a decision that would change everything. Keanu had been trying to enjoy a rare moment of peace. After weeks of back-to-back filming, meetings, and promotional events, he had finally carved out a few days to himself. He was driving through rural California with no destination in mind, just following roads that looked interesting and stopping whenever he felt like it. No security detail. No handlers. No photographers. Just him, his motorcycle parked outside, and a quiet meal in a diner that reminded him of simpler times. He had chosen the corner booth specifically because it offered a view of the entire restaurant while keeping him somewhat hidden. The baseball cap and sunglasses were his usual disguise. Nothing elaborate, just enough to avoid immediate recognition. Most of the time, people were too absorbed in their own lives to notice him anyway, which was exactly how he liked it. He had been halfway through his burger when the elderly man walked in. Keanu noticed him immediately, not because there was anything dramatic about his entrance, but because of the quiet dignity in his movements. The way he nodded respectfully to the waitress. The way he carefully chose a table that wouldn't bother anyone. The way he carried himself despite obvious fatigue. Then the comments started. Keanu's jaw tightened as he listened to the three young men in expensive suits. He had encountered people like this before, people who measured worth in dollars and perceived status, who thought cruelty was entertainment and humiliation was sport. In his years in Hollywood, he had seen every type of person, from the genuinely kind to the absolutely rotten. These three were definitely leaning toward rotten. He watched as the elderly man tried to ignore them, focusing on his coffee like it was the most interesting thing in the world. Keanu recognized that strategy. He had used it himself countless times when dealing with aggressive paparazzi or hostile strangers who thought fame gave them permission to be invasive. But this was different. This wasn't about celebrity or public attention. This was just plain, simple cruelty directed at someone who was vulnerable. When one of them tripped the old man's chair, Keanu's hand clenched into a fist under the table. He watched the wallet fall, the coins scatter, and the humiliation unfold. Every instinct told him to get up, to intervene, to tell these three exactly what he thought of their behavior. But he held back. Years of managing his public presence had taught him that sometimes direct confrontation made things worse. Sometimes it turned a private moment of cruelty into a media circus where the victim became a prop in someone else's story. So he watched. And he remembered every detail. He saw the tears on the old man's face. He saw the trembling hands. He saw the way the other customers looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to step in. And he saw the three young men, so pleased with themselves, so convinced of their own superiority. When they finally left, still laughing and reviewing their video, Keanu remained seated. The elderly man sat alone at his table, his sandwich untouched, his shoulders slightly hunched. He looked like someone who had been carrying a heavy weight for a very long time and had just been handed another load. Keanu waited until the old man finished his coffee and left some bills on the table. He watched him shuffle out the door, moving slower than when he had entered, as if something had been taken from him that couldn't be easily recovered. Only after the door closed did Keanu signal to the waitress. She approached his table with a professional smile, but he could see the anger still simmering in her eyes. "That man who just left," Keanu said quietly, keeping his voice low. "Does he come here often?" Linda looked at him carefully as if trying to decide whether to answer. Something in his tone must have convinced her he meant well. "Walter? Yeah, he's been coming here for 30 years. Since before I started working here, and that's saying something. What can you tell me about him?" Linda glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "Why do you want to know?" "Because what just happened wasn't right," Keanu said simply. "And I'd like to help if I can." She studied him for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. "His name is Walter Chen. He runs a small farm about 10 miles from here. Used to run it with his wife, but she passed away a couple years ago. Cancer. Since then, he's been managing alone. It's hard work for anyone, let alone someone his age." "And those three men?" Keanu asked. Linda's expression darkened. "Real estate developers. They've been bothering him for months, trying to get him to sell his land. They want to build some shopping complex or office park or something. Walter keeps saying no, so they keep getting nastier." She shook her head. "This is the first time they've come here, though. Usually they just harass him on his property or send threatening letters." Keanu felt his anger building again, but he kept it controlled. "What's the name of their company?" "Henderson Development Group, I think. Those three are junior guys, always talking big about their deals." Linda leaned in closer. "Between you and me, Walter's farm is in trouble. He can barely keep up with the bills. The big agricultural companies have made it almost impossible for small farmers to compete. But that land has been in his family for 3 generations. His grandfather started that farm. Selling it would break whatever's left of his heart. Does he have family? Anyone helping him?" Linda shook her head. "His son moved to Seattle years ago. They talk on the phone sometimes, but the son has his own family, his own problems. Walter won't ask him for help. Too proud, I guess. Or maybe just too tired of being a burden." Keanu nodded slowly, processing this information. "Thank you for telling me this. Why do you care?" Linda asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Then her eyes widened slightly as recognition dawned. "Wait, are you just someone who saw something wrong and wants to help?" Keanu said with a slight smile. "If you could keep this conversation between us, I'd appreciate it." Linda nodded, still looking a bit stunned. "Of course. But honestly, I'm not sure what anyone can do. Those developers have money and lawyers. Walter just has his pride in his land." After Linda left, Keanu sat in his booth for another 20 minutes thinking. He pulled out his phone and started making notes. Walter Chen, Henderson Development Group, Betty's Diner, rural California. He added details about what he had witnessed, the harassment, the video recording, the deliberate tripping. He thought about the many times he had encountered injustice in his life and career. The times he had been able to help and the times he hadn't. He thought about his own family struggles, his own experiences with loss and hardship. He had been fortunate in many ways, blessed with opportunities that others never got. But he had also learned that fortune came with responsibility. Before leaving the diner, Keanu left a $200 tip for Linda with a note that simply said, "Thank you for caring about your customers. Give Walter's next 10 meals on me. Don't tell him where it came from." Outside, he stood by his motorcycle for a moment, looking down the road in the direction the old farmer had gone. The sun was starting to sink lower in the sky, painting everything in shades of gold and orange. It was beautiful country, The kind of place where someone could build a life close to the earth, growing things, nurturing things. He pulled out his phone again and made his first call. It went to his assistant, someone he trusted completely. "Hey, I need you to look into something for me," he said. "A man named Walter Chen. He owns a farm somewhere around here. I need to know everything. His financial situation, what's happening with his property, who's putting pressure on him, and I need information on Henderson Development Group. Who runs it, what their business practices are like, everything." His assistant, used to unusual requests, simply asked, "How soon do you need this?" "As soon as possible. This is important." The second call went to his lawyer. "I need you to research harassment laws in California, particularly as they relate to property acquisition and elder abuse. And I want to know what legal options exist for someone being recorded without consent and having that recording shared online for the purpose of humiliation." The third call was to a friend who worked in agricultural advocacy. "I know this is out of the blue, but I need to understand the challenges facing small organic farmers right now. What kind of support exists? What resources are available? And what would it take to help someone modernize their operation without losing the core of what makes it special?" By the time he finished his calls, the sun had nearly set. Keanu started his motorcycle, the engine rumbling to life. But instead of heading back to wherever he had planned to go, he turned his bike in the direction Linda had indicated when she mentioned Walter's farm. He didn't approach the property. He just rode past slowly, taking in the sight of the modest farmhouse, the fields that stretched out behind it, the old barn that leaned slightly to one side. He saw Walter's truck parked near the house and a single light on in what was probably the kitchen. It looked like a place worth saving. It looked like a life worth protecting. As Keanu rode away into the darkening evening, he was already forming a plan. He had the resources. He had the connections. And now he had the motivation. Those three developers thought they could break an old man's spirit with mockery and intimidation. They thought their money and their youth gave them power over someone vulnerable. They were about to learn a very important lesson about what real power looked like. 2 days later, Keanu sat in his hotel room with a stack of documents spread across the desk. His assistant had worked fast, compiling a comprehensive report on Walter Chen and the situation surrounding his farm. What Keanu read made his blood boil, but it also gave him clarity about what needed to be done. Walter Chen, 72 years old, widower, sole proprietor of Chen Family Farms. The property consisted of 40 acres of fertile land that had been farmed by 3 generations of the Chen family. Walter's grandfather had purchased the land in 1949, shortly after immigrating from China. He had built the farm from nothing, working dawn to dusk, saving every penny, creating something that could be passed down to his children. Walter's father had expanded the operation, adding greenhouses and diversifying crops. By the 1980s, Chen Family Farms was known throughout the region for producing high-quality organic vegetables. They had been organic before organic was trendy, simply because that was how Walter's grandfather had always farmed, and the family saw no reason to change. Then came the challenges. Big agricultural corporations with their economies of scale, supermarket chains that demanded lower prices, rising property taxes, equipment that broke down and cost a fortune to replace, and then 2 years ago, Walter's wife Mary had been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. The medical bills had been catastrophic, even with insurance. She had lasted 8 months. Since her death, Walter had been struggling to keep the farm going by himself. He was too proud to ask his son for money, too stubborn to give up on his family's legacy, and now, too tired to fight off the vultures who saw his weakness and wanted to exploit it. Henderson Development Group had been circling for the past year. They had started with reasonable offers, but when Walter refused, their tactics changed. The offers got lower. The pressure got higher. They filed complaints with the county about supposed code violations. They sent lawyers with threatening letters. And now, according to the report, 3 of their junior associates had been making personal visits to Walter's farm, trying to intimidate him into selling, the 3 men from the diner, of course. Keanu dug deeper into Henderson Development Group. The company was owned by Richard Henderson, a local real estate mogul with a reputation for aggressive business practices. He specialized in buying up agricultural land and converting it to commercial use. The man had made millions doing it, and apparently he didn't much care who got hurt in the process. But here was the interesting part. Henderson Development Group was in the middle of a major project that required assembling a large parcel of land. They already owned most of what they needed. Walter's 40 acres was one of the last holdouts. If they couldn't acquire it, their entire project might fall apart. That explained why they were getting desperate. Keanu's lawyer had provided information about the video that had been posted online. It had been shared on social media by one of the three men using his personal account. The post had gotten several thousand views and dozens of comments, most of them mocking Walter. The caption read, "This is what happens when you're too stubborn to accept reality. Progress waits for no one." The legal opinion was clear. The recording and posting of the video without consent, especially for the purpose of harassment and intimidation, could potentially be grounds for several legal claims: defamation, invasion of privacy, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and given the context of the ongoing property dispute, it could be seen as part of a harassment campaign related to business practices. But lawsuits took time and money, two things Walter didn't have. Keanu needed a different approach, something more immediate and more effective. His friend in agricultural advocacy had provided useful information too. Small organic farms like Walter's were struggling all over the country, but there were resources available: grant programs for sustainable agriculture, equipment loan programs, farmers' cooperatives that could help with distribution and marketing, technical assistance programs. The problem was that many farmers, especially older ones, didn't know these resources existed or didn't have the time and energy to navigate the complex application processes. Keanu spent the next several hours making more calls. He contacted sustainable agriculture organizations and explained that he wanted to help a struggling farmer, but needed to do it in a way that preserved the man's dignity. He reached out to equipment manufacturers about donation programs. He talked to marketing consultants who specialized in organic produce. He called in favors from restaurant owners he knew who were always looking for high-quality local ingredients. By the end of the second day, he had assembled a plan. But first, he needed to deal with the immediate threat. He called his lawyer back. "I want you to send a cease and desist letter to Henderson Development Group and to those three individuals personally. Make it very clear that their harassment of Walter Chen needs to stop immediately. The video needs to come down. The personal visits need to end, and any further contact needs to go through proper legal channels." "We can do that," his lawyer said. "But you should know, letters like this sometimes escalate situations rather than resolving them. These developers might push back." "Let them," Keanu said quietly. "I want them to know they're being watched. I want them to understand that Walter Chen isn't alone anymore." "Are you planning to identify yourself in this process?" Keanu thought about that. Part of him wanted to. Part of him wanted those three men to know exactly who had witnessed their cruelty. But another part, the part that had learned hard lessons about fame and privacy, knew that inserting his celebrity into the situation might make it worse. It might turn Walter's story into a media circus. It might make the old farmer uncomfortable. "Not yet," he said finally. "For now, just make it clear that Mr. Chen has legal representation and financial backing. That should be enough to make them think twice." The next step was harder. Keanu needed to approach Walter himself, and he needed to do it in a way that wouldn't make the old man feel like he was accepting charity. Pride was a delicate thing, especially for someone who had spent his whole life working with his hands building something from nothing. Keanu drove out to the farm on a Tuesday afternoon. He had called ahead, using his assistant's phone number, saying only that someone wanted to discuss a business opportunity related to organic farming. Walter had been hesitant on the phone but had agreed to a meeting. The farm looked even more tired in daylight. The house needed painting. The barn needed repairs. Some of the fencing was held together with wire and hope. But the fields themselves were beautiful. Even with limited resources, Walter had managed to keep his crops healthy. Rows of vegetables stretched out in neat lines. The soil looked rich and dark. This was land that had been loved and cared for. Walter stood on the porch waiting. He wore clean work clothes, his best shirt probably. His expression was guarded, suspicious even. Keanu couldn't blame him. The old man had been through too much to trust easily. Keanu parked and walked toward the porch, taking off his sunglasses. He wanted Walter to see his face, to recognize him from the diner if possible. "Mr. Chen, thank you for agreeing to meet with me." Walter nodded stiffly. "You said something about a business opportunity." I'll tell you right now, if you're here to try to buy my land, you can turn around and leave. I'm not here to buy your land, Keanu said. I'm here because I was at Betty's diner last Thursday. I saw what those men did to you. Walter's face changed. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed quickly by embarrassment. I don't need pity, he said, his voice harder now. I can take care of myself. I know you can, Keanu said gently. That's obvious from looking at this place. You've kept this farm going through circumstances that would have broken most people. I'm not here to pity you, Mr. Chen. I'm here because what I saw made me angry and I have the resources to do something about it. Walter studied him for a long moment. You're that actor, he said finally. My wife liked your movies. I'm glad, Keanu said. May I come in? I promise I'll be straight with you about what I'm proposing. If you don't like it, I'll leave and you'll never hear from me again. After a pause, Walter stepped aside and gestured toward the door. Coffee's on, he said. Might as well not waste it. The inside of the house was clean but sparse. The furniture was old but well-maintained. Photos lined the walls, 3 generations of the Chen family, Walter in his youth standing with a beautiful woman who must have been Mary. Their wedding photo, pictures of their son at various ages, Mary in recent years, thinner but smiling. They sat at the kitchen table and Walter poured coffee into mismatched mugs. For a moment, neither spoke. Those men from the diner, Walter said finally. They work for Henderson Development. They've been harassing me for months. I know, Keanu said. I had them investigated. The video they posted has been taken down, by the way. My lawyers made sure of that. Walter's eyes widened. You did that? It was wrong what they did. They'll be getting letters today informing them that any further harassment will result in legal action. Walter shook his head slowly. I don't understand. Why would you do this? You don't know me. Because someone should, Keanu said simply. Because I watched you sit in that diner trying to maintain your dignity, while those men tried to strip it away. Because this farm represents something important and people like that shouldn't be allowed to destroy it, just because they have money and you don't. He leaned forward. Mr. Chen, I want to help you save this farm, not by buying it, not by taking it from you, but by giving you the resources and support you need to make it thrive again. I've arranged for equipment, for technical assistance, for connections to markets that will pay what your produce is actually worth. I want to help you fight. Walter's hands trembled around his coffee mug. Why? He asked again, his voice barely a whisper. Keanu looked out the kitchen window at the fields beyond. My family struggled too, he said quietly. Different circumstances, different time, but struggle is struggle. My stepfather worked hard jobs to support us. I saw what it meant to work with your hands, to build something, to keep going even when everything seemed impossible. He turned back to Walter. And I've been fortunate. Very fortunate. But fortune doesn't mean much if you can't use it to help people who deserve better. Walter's eyes glistened with moisture. I can't pay you back. I'm not asking you to. This isn't a loan. Think of it as an investment in something that matters. Your grandfather built this farm with his own hands. Your father expanded it. You've kept it alive through everything life has thrown at you. That kind of legacy shouldn't disappear because some real estate developers decided they want to build another shopping center. I don't take charity, Walter said, his voice firm despite the emotion in it. Then don't think of it as charity. Think of it as justice. Those men tried to break you. Let's prove they failed. They talked for 2 hours. Keanu laid out his plan in detail. He had arranged for a farming equipment company to donate modern machinery, irrigation systems that would reduce water usage and increase efficiency. He had connected Walter with a sustainable agriculture consultant who could help optimize crop selection and planting schedules. He had contacted a farmers' cooperative that specialized in organic produce, an organization that could handle marketing and distribution to high-end restaurants and specialty stores throughout California. Most importantly, he had found a young farmer named Tommy Rodriguez who was looking to learn traditional farming methods. Tommy had recently graduated from an agricultural program but couldn't afford his own land. He would work with Walter, learning from his experience while providing the physical labor that Walter struggled with now. It would be a partnership that benefited both of them. The equipment arrives in 2 weeks, Keanu explained. The consultant will come out next week to walk the property and make recommendations. Tommy can start whenever you're ready. The cooperative has already expressed interest in your crops. They've seen photos of your fields and they're impressed with the quality. Walter sat in silence, processing everything. Finally, he spoke. What about Henderson Development? They won't just give up. Let me worry about them, Keanu said. The legal letters went out this morning. They're going to back off. What Keanu didn't tell Walter was the full extent of the pressure he was applying. His lawyers hadn't just sent cease and desist letters. They had also filed complaints with the State Real Estate Commission about harassment and unethical business practices. They had contacted the local media, providing carefully worded tips about aggressive development tactics targeting elderly farmers. And Keanu had used his connections to reach out to other property owners in the area, people who Henderson Development had been pressuring, organizing them to push back collectively. Henderson's big project needed multiple properties. If enough people refused to sell, the whole thing collapsed. Keanu was betting that once Henderson realized Walter had serious backing, they would decide the fight wasn't worth it. And if they didn't, well, Keanu had deeper pockets and more patience than they did. I need to think about this, Walter said finally. Of course. Take all the time you need. Keanu stood to leave, then paused. Mr. Chen, can I ask you something? Why did you stay? When things got hard? When your wife got sick, when the bills piled up, why didn't you just sell and take the money? Walter walked to the window looking out at his fields. My grandfather came to this country with nothing but hope and determination. He bought this land when nobody else would sell to a Chinese immigrant. He made it productive through sheer will. My father honored that sacrifice by building on what his father started. And Mary and I, we raised our son here. We taught him about hard work and commitment and caring for the land. He turned back to Keanu. This farm isn't just dirt and plants. It's proof that dignity matters, that hard work matters, that honoring those who came before us matters. The day I sell this land to people who just want to pave it over, I lose more than a farm. I lose my connection to everyone I've ever loved. Keanu understood. Then let's make sure you never have to. 3 days later, Walter called. I'll accept your help, he said. But I have conditions. Name them. First, I work. I might not be able to do everything I used to, but I'm not retiring. This is still my farm. Absolutely. Second, once the farm is profitable again, I start paying you back. I don't care if you say it's not necessary. I will pay you back. We can discuss that when the time comes. Third, you visit sometimes. Mary always said that strangers who help you aren't strangers anymore, they're friends. So you have to be willing to be friends, Keanu smiled. I'd like that. The transformation began immediately. The equipment company sent a team to deliver and set up new irrigation systems, a modern tractor, and various tools that would make Walter's work easier and more efficient. They spent a full day training both Walter and Tommy on how to use everything properly. The consultant, a woman named Dr. Patricia Wong who specialized in sustainable agriculture, walked every inch of the property. She took soil samples, examined the existing crops, and studied the water systems. Her report was detailed and encouraging. The land was in excellent condition considering the limited resources Walter had been working with. With proper equipment and optimized planting strategies, the farm could produce significantly more while actually reducing the amount of work required. Your grandfather knew what he was doing when he chose this land, Dr. Wong told Walter. The soil quality is exceptional, and the fact that you've maintained organic practices means you can command premium prices. You're sitting on something valuable here, Mr. Chen. Tommy Rodriguez arrived on a Monday morning, nervous and eager. He was 26 with a degree in sustainable agriculture and a dream of eventually running his own farm. When Walter showed him around the property, Tommy's enthusiasm was infectious. This is incredible, Tommy kept saying. Do you know how rare it is to find land that's been organically managed for this long? The soil biology must be amazing. And these heritage varieties you're growing, some of these are hard to find anymore. Walter found himself smiling for the first time in months. Tommy's excitement reminded him of his own younger days, when farming had felt like an adventure rather than a burden. They fell into a routine quickly. Tommy handled the heavy physical work while Walter provided guidance and expertise. Together, they began implementing Dr. Wong's recommendations. They planted new crops selected for their profitability and suitability to the land. They repaired the barn and organized the equipment. They fixed fences and cleared irrigation ditches. The Farmers Cooperative sent a representative who walked through the fields and tasted samples of Walter's produce. She was impressed. We can place all of this, she said. We have restaurants asking for exactly this quality. Organic, local, grown with care. You're going to do very well. Meanwhile, Keanu's pressure on Henderson Development was working. The legal complaints had forced them to pull back. The media attention had made them nervous. Other property owners had started refusing their offers. The 3 junior associates who had harassed Walter had been quietly reassigned to different projects. Richard Henderson himself had called Keanu's lawyer. The conversation, according to the lawyer, had been tense but productive. Henderson claimed he hadn't known about the harassment tactics his employees had been using. He agreed to cease all contact with Walter Chen and to remove the property from his acquisition list. Keanu suspected Henderson was lying about not knowing, but the result was what mattered. Walter would be left alone. 6 weeks after their first meeting, Keanu drove out to the farm again. This time he saw immediate differences. The barn had been painted. New fencing lined the driveway. The fields looked more organized, more vibrant. Tommy's truck was parked by the barn, and he could hear voices coming from one of the greenhouses. Walter met him at the door, and Keanu was struck by the change in the old man's appearance. He stood straighter. His eyes were brighter. He smiled easily. "Come see what we've done," Walter said with pride in his voice. They walked the property together, Walter pointing out improvements and explaining Tommy's ideas for crop rotation. They visited the greenhouse where Tommy was experimenting with heirloom tomatoes. They examined the new irrigation system that had reduced water usage by 40%, while actually improving crop health. "The cooperative placed our first order," Walter said. 3 restaurants in San Francisco. They're paying prices I never dreamed of. Tommy says if we keep this up, we'll be profitable within the year. "That's wonderful," Keanu said, genuinely happy. Walter stopped walking and turned to face him. "I want to show you something." He led Keanu to a small shed behind the house. Inside, mounted on the wall, was a framed photograph. It showed Walter's grandfather standing in front of a young tree, a shovel in his hand and a smile on his weathered face. "That's the first tree he planted on this property," Walter said. "An apple tree. It's still producing fruit 75 years later." He paused. "My grandfather used to say that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time is now. I thought my tree planting days were over. I thought I was just waiting for everything to die. But you gave me a second best time." Keanu felt his throat tighten with emotion. "You did this, Mr. Chen. I just helped remove some obstacles." "You gave me hope," Walter said simply. "And sometimes that's all someone needs." 6 months had passed since that afternoon in Betty's diner. Walter stood in his fields on a bright Saturday morning, watching as dozens of cars pulled into the makeshift parking area Tommy had created near the barn. Today was special. Today marked the 75th anniversary of Chen Family Farms, and the whole community had turned out to celebrate. The transformation of the farm had exceeded everyone's expectations, even Dr. Wong's optimistic projections. The new equipment and methods had increased productivity by 60%. The Farmers Cooperative had expanded Walter's market reach to restaurants throughout Northern California. High-end establishments were now competing for his produce, particularly his heirloom tomatoes and specialty greens. The farm wasn't just surviving anymore. It was thriving. But something else had changed too, something more important than profits. The farm had become a teaching center. Tommy had started a program where young farmers could come for weekend workshops, learning traditional organic methods from Walter, while also getting hands-on experience with modern sustainable practices. On any given weekend, you might find a dozen people working in the fields, asking questions, taking notes, and absorbing knowledge that Walter had spent a lifetime accumulating. "You're going to have to say a few words," Tommy said, walking up to Walter with a grin. "People are expecting it," Walter grimaced. "I'm not good at speeches. Just talk from the heart. That's all anyone wants." The crowd had gathered near the barn where tables had been set up with food and drinks. Local businesses had donated everything. Betty's Diner had provided sandwiches and coffee. The Farmers Cooperative had brought fresh produce from partner farms. Someone had even brought a cake decorated with a tractor and the number 75. Walter recognized many faces in the crowd. Linda from the diner, who had given him encouragement during his darkest days. Dr. Wong, who had become not just a consultant but a genuine friend. Other local farmers who had faced similar pressures from developers and had found strength in Walter's resistance. Young agriculture students who saw in him a connection to farming traditions they were trying to preserve. And there, Standing at the back of the crowd, wearing his usual baseball cap and keeping a low profile, was Keanu. Tommy called for everyone's attention and gave a brief introduction, talking about the farm's history and recent revival. Then he invited Walter to speak. Walter walked to the front, his weathered hands slightly shaky but his voice steady. "I'm not much of a speaker," he began, "so I'll keep this short. 75 years ago, my grandfather planted his first seeds in this soil. He was a Chinese immigrant in a time when that wasn't easy. He faced discrimination, hardship, and doubt. But he believed in two things: hard work and the dignity of growing food for people." He paused, looking out at the attentive faces. "My father built on what my grandfather started. He expanded the farm and passed down not just land but values, respect for the earth, commitment to quality, the belief that what we do matters. My wife Mary and I tried to honor that legacy, and for a while I thought the legacy was going to die with me." His voice grew stronger. 6 months ago I was ready to give up. I was tired. I was alone. I was being pressured by people who saw my land as nothing more than a business opportunity. They tried to humiliate me into submission, and almost succeeded. Walter's eyes found Keanu in the crowd. But someone was watching that day. Someone who didn't know me, didn't owe me anything, but chose to help anyway. He reminded me that dignity isn't something other people can take away unless we let them. He gave me the resources to fight back, but more importantly, he gave me hope. He gestured around the farm. "This revival isn't just about new equipment or better markets. It's about remembering what matters. It's about a community that stands together. It's about young people like Tommy, who want to learn traditional ways and combine them with new ideas. It's about proving that there's still room in this world for farms that care more about quality than quantity, for people who measure success in more than just dollars." The crowd applauded, but Walter held up his hand. He wasn't finished. "My grandfather used to say that a tree grows strong not just from good soil, but from weathering storms. This farm has weathered storms. I've weathered storms, and I'm standing here today to tell you that storms pass. What remains is what we build, what we protect, and who we choose to stand with." He paused, emotion thick in his voice. "I want to thank everyone who helped make this possible. Dr. Wong for her expertise, Tommy for his energy and ideas, the Farmers Cooperative for believing in us, Linda and everyone at Betty's for being a second home, the young farmers who come here to learn, reminding me why this work matters, and especially someone who taught me that kindness from strangers can change everything." The applause was genuine and warm. People came up to shake Walter's hand, to share their own stories, to thank him for inspiring them. Several young farmers asked about the workshop schedule for the coming months. A local newspaper reporter requested an interview about the farm's revival. Keanu remained in the background, content to observe. But Walter saw him trying to slip away toward the parking area and called out, "Wait, please." The crowd parted as Walter made his way to Keanu. They stood facing each other. These two men from completely different worlds who had found common ground in a moment of witnessed cruelty. "Thank you," Walter said simply, "for everything." "You did the work," Keanu replied. "I just helped remove some obstacles. You gave me more than that. You gave me my dignity back. You gave me hope. You gave me a future." Walter's eyes were moist. "Mary would have liked you. She always said the measure of a person isn't in what they have, but in what they do with what they have. You could have just driven past that day. You could have ignored what you saw. But you didn't. You stopped. You cared. You acted." Other people had started to realize who Keanu was. Whispers rippled through the crowd. A few people pulled out phones. But Keanu didn't seem to mind. This moment belonged to Walter, and he was willing to be part of it. "Can I tell them?" Walter asked quietly. "Can I tell them what you did?" Keanu hesitated, then nodded. "If you think it matters." Walter turned to the crowd, which had grown quiet with curiosity. "This man," Walter said, his voice carrying across the gathering, "witnessed me being humiliated by 3 developers who wanted my land. He saw strangers being cruel to an old man they considered worthless. And instead of looking away like most people would, he decided to help. He's the reason this farm survived. He's the reason I'm still standing here." He looked back at Keanu. He did it not for publicity or recognition, but because he believed it was the right thing to do. That's the kind of person the world needs more of. Not people who use their power to hurt others, but people who use their resources to lift others up. The crowd erupted in genuine applause. A few people approached to thank Keanu directly. but most seemed to understand his desire for privacy and simply nodded their appreciation from a distance. Later, after most of the crowd had dispersed, Keanu and Walter sat on the farmhouse porch, drinking coffee and watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. "What happened to those 3 developers?" Walter asked. "They're working different jobs now," Keanu said. "Henderson Development reorganized after all the complaints. From what I hear, they're much more careful about their tactics these days." He smiled. Sometimes the best revenge is just forcing people to become better versions of themselves. "And Henderson's big project?" "Fell through. Couldn't assemble enough land. Last I heard, they're focusing on different areas now, places where they can work with property owners instead of against them." Walter nodded with satisfaction. "Good." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Tommy emerged from the barn, waved goodnight, and drove off in his truck. The last few visitors said their goodbyes. The farm settled into evening quiet, just the sounds of insects and a gentle breeze through the crops. "I've been thinking," Walter said eventually, "about legacy, about what we leave behind. I used to think it was just about the land, about keeping the farm in the family. But it's bigger than that, isn't it?" "What do you mean?" "Those young farmers who come here to learn. Tommy building his knowledge and experience. The restaurant serving food grown with care and respect. Even the story of what happened, how kindness changed everything. That's all legacy too. It ripples out in ways we can't predict." Keanu thought about his own legacy, about the roles he'd played and the films he'd made, but also about moments like this. Private acts of help that would never make headlines. Quiet interventions that changed individual lives. He realized Walter was right. Legacy wasn't just about the big, visible accomplishments. It was about the ripples. "My grandfather planted that apple tree 75 years ago," Walter continued. "He never saw it fully mature. He died before it bore its best fruit. But that tree is still here, still producing, still giving. That's what I want. I want this farm to still be teaching people long after I'm gone. I want Tommy and the others to take what they learn here and spread it further. I want people to remember that one person's kindness can save more than just a farm. It can save a spirit, it will," Keanu said with certainty. "What you're building here matters. People will remember." As the sky darkened and stars began to appear, Walter stood up slowly. "Will you come back?" he asked. "Not for any special occasion. Just to visit. Have coffee. Walk the fields. Mary always said that the best friendships are the ones that don't need reasons." "I'd like that very much," Keanu replied. Over the following months and years, Keanu did visit regularly.